Okay, so we've prepared some slides based on our discussions today. Some of the slides won't be applicable to the Welsh medium group, so Nana or Clive might want to chip in at that point, but I'm just going to share these slides and we're going to look at these in the next 10 minutes roughly. So hopefully you can see that. Start my slideshow. Okay. So just to recap that this is what we did today. We had 4 sessions. We had an introductory where we kind of thought about the module and the assignment. We had course strand 1, which looked at debates around inclusion. We had an excellent Ask the Expert session. And then we had course strand 2, which was looking at the ALN policy and strengths and weaknesses, and kind of more of a kind of practice-based session. So the sort of summary of discussion at course strand 1 was very definitely around this idea that inclusion as a concept is a kind of wider concept than SEN, ALN. It's kind of encompasses the idea of culture and community, curriculum, ethos and attitudes, positive and respectful relationships and acknowledgement of diversity, and the implication of systems beyond the classroom, like systems for leadership, systems for assessment and wider community practices and all that kind of stuff. So we talked about inclusion as a process. There isn't an end point really to inclusion. You know, a setting that says we are inclusive probably has a problem, because, you know, inclusion is something that needs to be continually worked at. We looked at how it kind of involves this movement away from a kind of strong focus on the individual and deficits that are kind of located inside the individual, and kind of a move towards more of a focus on the external influences on learning. So, you know, how environments are organized, teaching practices, people's attitudes and cultures and attitudes of leadership, a whole kind of range of things. We kind of went over the Mel Ainscoe's Principles of Inclusion, which is a really, really interesting article that Christina kind of explored. And he talks about, you know, that the principles of inclusion, which is something that is shared across settings, even though practices can be hugely diverse, is this kind of existence of some kind of shared understanding amongst practitioners and other stakeholders. Use of evidence, but not necessarily strictly a kind of numerical data, but it's much more kind of a creative approach to evidence, where voice and different kind of views on what's going on is gathered and used to review and to plan. The inclusion is about a matter of whole school improvement and also community involvement. And we talked about Curriculum for Wales and how it offers, what it offers in some of these areas, actually, around teacher autonomy and ability to be flexible and to experiment and to provide opportunities for the development of inclusive practices. And but there was this kind of very interesting discussion that we had in the English medium group. Somebody brought up the discussion that there was in their group about 2 settings, one which was mainstream, which was kind of rhetorically inclusive, but actually took learners out of class, and one which was a special school, which was teaching learners who had quite complex needs, but were teaching them forms of communication and other kinds of skills that was going to allow them to be more included within society. So it was kind of like opening up the discussion to this sort of idea around sense of belonging and real, true participation. That was a kind of very, very interesting discussion. I don't know if Nana or Clive want to add anything to that, or whether I should just carry on. Hopefully that kind of reflected some of what was discussed in the Welsh medium group as well.
Yes, similar, very, very similar discussions, covered all the same aspects that you've covered so far, Carmel, and really, really interesting discussions from our participants as well.
Okay, thanks, Nana, that's great. Okay. So then we had our Ask the Expert session, which we thought was really, you know, this focus on Wales and research that's gone on in Wales. We hope that you really enjoyed that session. And we well, in that session, obviously, Catherine, she shared this quite extensive amount of research now she's done within the Welsh context, and some of her research findings, this issue of the possible over-identification of special educational needs within Wales, that large numbers of learners have been labelled with that at some point in their career, school career, and the impact of the environment on the identification of SEN and ALN. That's a very kind of significant finding from her research. Excuse me, and also the fact that SEN is actually a very poor predictor of improved learner outcomes. In fact, it kind of predicts the opposite to that. So her research, particularly in that area, I think is extremely powerful. And what Catherine did as well, I think really helpfully, was raise some of kind of key issues for Wales, issues around kind of clarity and consistency, not only in terms of policy, which kind of seems to both subscribe to an inclusive education agenda, but also kind of subscribes to a deficit model in some of its documents, but also in terms of practice and kind of a shared or lack of shared understanding across schools and colleges, across individual practitioners, but also the issue of resource. That actually teachers have different views about kind of diversity and what they have responsibility for, and that things like workload, all the changes that have occurred in the education system in recent years, and kind of levels of confidence, that those might be kind of issues there. And also this issue of numbers. So, what's clearly happened in Wales is that there's been a reduction in numbers of ALN learners, but there is this whole group who you could describe as the previously School Action Plus group, possibly, who clearly still need support, but don't actually have come kind of into any kind of category or even have any kind of term to describe them. And but Catherine also raised this issue of curriculum for Wales and saw it as an opportunity in terms of its kind of emphasis on quality of teaching and high quality teaching as a kind of way forward, and assessment practices, the importance of teacher autonomy in this area, and also the importance of professional learning. Then after lunch, we had course strand 2, and this is a sort of summary again of the discussion that we've just had, where we were kind of focusing more on practice and focusing on, specific strategies, and people listed a whole range of strategies, which I think could be very roughly kind of organized into these areas of kind of organization, of classrooms and spaces, and then sort of quite everyday simple strategies, often quite simple strategies, but also more what might be termed kind of specialist programs that are also being used, but that actually strategies for inclusion also include things like supporting staff and staff development and working with parents. And the point was made that inclusive education, it taps into kind of whole school systems, whole school systems for planning, whole school systems for reviewing, whole school systems for liaising across staff and across the different parts of the organisation, and that actually needs to be a consideration for evaluation too. Evaluation needs to be not just at the classroom level or at the level of teacher-pupil interactions, but also needs to be at the level of leadership, culture, kind of engagement in community, all sorts of things. So I don't know if you want to add anything there, Nana?
No, our discussions were very, very similar as well, Carmel. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, great. So just finally then, so thinking about kind of next steps after today, well, you should be offered drop-in sessions next week. So I know at USW we've got drop-in session on Thursday evening. So that's something, it's just an optional session. So it's really if you want to go along and if you've got questions or something that you want to check out from today, but you don't have to go, it's an optional one. Your tutor will be available at that time and there'll be a link provided. But also, of course, you can continue looking at the Pebble Pad materials, that we've got lots of reflective activities on there. And some of those you might want to kind of look at or revisit in the light of kind of the discussion today. And of course, there's also preparation for our next conference Saturday, which is on November the 16th, and looking at the materials for course strand 3 and course strand 4. And you might also kind of maybe want to have a look at the assignment brief as well. And just to recap on that, so the assignment is this 4,000 word piece that we're asking you for, which is about kind of looking at 2 or 3 strategies within your setting, and reflecting on those and evaluating those, but in the light of your reading. That's going to be the critical thing. The assignment has a very clear structure. It's this kind of 500 word introduction to your setting, and also kind of like discussing that in relation to your reading and current debates around inclusion and special educational needs or additional learning needs, and then using a kind of reflective framework to talk about practice within your setting. So as I say, these slides will be posted onto the Pebble Pad sometime next week. By next Friday, they should all the kind of materials from today will be up there. You can see there'll be the National Saturday resources, and there's also the assignment guide on the Pebble Pad. That's where you find it. So I don't know if there are any questions. I'll stop sharing. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat to have a look at.